Caitlin Clark didn't just return to the WNBA. She walked back into the league like a storm that had been building for 298 days, carrying every ounce of frustration, hunger, pressure, doubt, and obsession that had been trapped inside her while the basketball world kept spinning without her. This wasn't some soft comeback story where a superstar checks back into the lineup, scores a few buckets, smiles for the cameras, and calls it a successful return. No, this felt bigger, louder, more emotional, more violent in the way it shook the entire league awake. The moment she stepped onto that floor inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the building transformed into pure electricity. Fans weren't just cheering for a player returning from injury. They were witnessing the rebirth of the biggest force women's basketball has seen in years. Every scream from the crowd carried months of anticipation. Every camera inside that arena followed her movements like the entire sport revolved around her existence again. And honestly, it did. Because when Caitlin Clark disappeared with that groin injury, the league kept moving, but something was missing. The fire felt different. The energy felt incomplete. The noise around the game never truly stopped, but the center of gravity shifted into silence while everyone waited for the one player capable of making every possession feel historic. And the terrifying part for the rest of the WNBA is this. After everything she went through, after all the rehab, the pain, the mental exhaustion, the pressure of expectations growing louder every single day she was away, she still came back and detonated 8 records in a single night. That's not normal. That's not a good performance. That's not even greatness. That's a warning shot to the entire league. Because most players need months to rediscover rhythm after losing an entire season. Caitlin Clark needed one game to remind everybody that she bends basketball reality around her presence. The first half looked human. The rust was obvious. Turnovers stacked up. The timing looked shaky. The shots weren't falling consistently. Dallas pressured her relentlessly and tried to force her into uncomfortable decisions every possession. But even while struggling, the building stayed alive because everyone could feel it coming. Everyone could sense that eventually the switch would flip. Then it happened. One moment changed the atmosphere entirely. Clark caught the ball, spun near the elbow, froze the defense, and delivered a behind-the-back pass so absurd that it looked less like basketball and more like instinct taking physical form. The crowd exploded because they realized something terrifying in real time. The injury may have taken months from her career, but it didn't take her genius. Her vision was still there. Her feel for the game was still supernatural. Her ability to manipulate defenders like chess pieces was untouched. From that point forward, the arena turned into chaos. Deep threes started falling. Transition attacks became relentless. Her pace accelerated the game into insanity. Dallas players looked exhausted trying to contain her because Caitlin Clark doesn't just play basketball. She forces everyone around her to survive basketball at her speed. That's why the entire game felt like it was being played on fast forward. Possession after possession turned into a sprint. Nobody could breathe. Nobody could relax. And Clark admitted it herself afterward, saying the pace was so insane that players barely had enough oxygen left to communicate. But that's the world Caitlin Clark creates. She drags games into a level of intensity where logic disappears and only survival remains. And somehow, even after nearly 300 days away from real WNBA action, she still controlled the emotional pulse of the game like she had never left. What makes her return even more unbelievable is that this wasn't simply about scoring. Plenty of stars can put points on the board. What Clark does is far more dangerous because she controls every layer of the game simultaneously. She scores, rebounds, creates offense, manipulates spacing, controls tempo, breaks defensive structures, and psychologically overwhelms opponents all at once. That's why her milestones matter differently. Becoming the fastest point guard in WNBA history to reach 1,000 points isn't just a cool statistic. Reaching that number while also piling up massive rebound and assist totals proves she impacts every inch of the floor at a historic level. She shattered records once held by legends like Diana Taurasi, and she did it faster, younger, and with more pressure than almost anyone who has ever entered this league. That's the terrifying reality the WNBA is now facing. Caitlin Clark isn't simply becoming a superstar. She's accelerating toward all-time status at a speed the sport has never really seen before. And while all of this was happening, Indiana's offense looked absolutely terrifying. Kelsey Mitchell attacked Dallas like a flamethrower, dropping a franchise record scoring performance for a season opener, and refusing to let Indiana collapse while Clark worked through early game nerves. Mitchell played like someone possessed, slicing through defenders, knocking down impossible shots, and carrying the offense whenever momentum started slipping away. Then there was Aliyah Boston, who looked every bit like a future MVP candidate. Her efficiency was brutal. Her physicality overwhelmed Dallas inside. Every touch felt dangerous. Every transition run created panic. Most athletes hate those feelings. Caitlin Clark craves them because they remind her she's alive. During her injury absence, she supported her teammates, smiled on sidelines, and stayed engaged publicly, but internally she was starving to compete again. Watching instead of playing was torture for someone wired like her. Basketball isn't something she does casually. It's embedded in her identity. That's why returning meant so much emotionally. Fans saw the superstar. They saw the highlights. But underneath it all was an athlete who spent months wondering when she'd feel whole again. And the second she stepped back into that arena, you could feel the emotional release exploding out of her. That's why even imperfect moments felt powerful. She didn't need a flawless performance to own the night. She only needed to remind the world who she is. And she absolutely did. But buried underneath all the records and celebration was a brutal truth Indiana cannot ignore. They lost. And not because their offense failed. The offense looked terrifying. The real problem was defense, and it nearly erased one of the greatest opening night performances the league has ever seen. Dallas carved Indiana apart with spacing, movement, and ruthless execution. The Wings shot ridiculous percentages because the Fever repeatedly failed to rotate, communicate, and close out properly. Open shooters kept appearing. Transition defense collapsed too often. Rebounding lapses extended possessions. The Fever scored over 100 points and still lost because Dallas looked comfortable offensively almost the entire night. That should scare Indiana, because championship teams cannot survive by trying to outscore every opponent in track meets. Stephanie White knows it. Caitlin Clark knows it. The locker room knows it. Offense may bring headlines, but defense decides who survives in the playoffs. And right now, Indiana looks like a team still searching desperately for defensive identity. Yet somehow that almost makes the Fever more fascinating. Because despite all their flaws, despite the defensive breakdowns, despite the rust, despite Clark still not looking fully sharp yet, they still produce one of the most explosive offensive performances in league history. Imagine what happens when the chemistry fully develops. Imagine what happens when Clark gets her conditioning completely back. Imagine what happens when the defensive communication improves and the rotations tighten up. That's the terrifying thought hanging over the league now. Indiana hasn't arrived yet, and they still nearly overwhelmed Dallas with pure offensive firepower alone. The ceiling looks terrifying. And the heartbeat of that ceiling is Caitlin Clark, the player who spent 298 days away from real WNBA basketball, and somehow returned looking even more dangerous because of what the struggle revealed about her mentality. Injuries break many athletes mentally,